The book George Washington by Robert Hughes was written in 1930, so it's a much older book, and it gave a lot of interesting historical background into George Washington and what all he did in the army in his time to help America. The first chapter is called The Dawn of 77, meaning the year 1776. A lot happened in 1776 to lay the foundation for things to come. And George Washington kept trying and trying and trying to get a regular standing army for that time. He knew he needed a regular army with enough men to be able to fight effectively. But he always had trouble throughout the war getting enough men. Men would join, men would leave, and sometimes no men were joining at all. And in New York, there were so many Tories that one of Washington's own bodyguards became part of a plan to try to kill Washington. So he had a very, very hard time during that time. John Adams was another leader of the time, and Robert Hughes said, Adams knew all too well that only a minute portion of his fellow citizens did any public service, and he expressed to his wife a dismal hope that defeat might, quote, cure Americans of their vicious and luxurious and effeminate appetites, passions, and habits, a more dangerous army to American liberty than Mr. Howe's. When I read that quote jumped out at me, that the men that we think of back then, we might think of them as being so brave, so victorious, so hardworking. But according to John Adams, a lot of Americans had already given into a lack of discipline and were not dedicated to their country. And that lack of discipline created a more dangerous army to American liberty than the actual enemy, the British. Quite an interesting thought for today as well, given our society. Are we really hardworking now in America? Are we really dedicated to doing the best that we can in America anymore? And are we our own worst enemy sometimes? We tend to think of Washington and Virginia going hand in hand because Washington was born in Virginia and spent many years in that state, but John Adams viewed Virginia differently. He said, we owe no thanks to Virginia for Washington. Virginia is indebted to Massachusetts for Washington, not Massachusetts to Virginia. Massachusetts made him a general against the inclination of Virginia. Virginia never made him more than a colonel. Before when I studied Washington, I always read about Washington and Virginia. I never knew before that Massachusetts had a hand in the making of George Washington, and that there's, according to John Adams, a debate between those two states for making Washington who he was. Those were just a few facts from that first chapter, The Dawn of 77, giving part of an introduction, part of an overview to how things were for Washington at that time. Next time we will continue with some things from that first chapter.